Well, good morning and welcome to Dunfermline West Baptist Church's reflection in the Psalms and a time of prayer. My name's Anthony Luxton and I'm the pastor of Dunfermline West Baptist Church. And this morning, I'm just going to be leading us in a very brief reflection on Psalm 7. And then after that, we're going to enter into a time of prayer together. There'll be an opportunity to join in with us over Zoom, whether you do that on your laptop, your tablet, or your phone, or via telephone, or you can also continue to pray with us by joining in and following along with the structure of the prayer via the comments. Thank you so much for coming and joining with us here this morning. I wonder whether now that certainly in England that there seems to be a very slight easing of the restrictions, that the 11 o'clock time will gradually become maybe a time which isn't as convenient for so many people. Perhaps you could help us by letting us know whether if we were to hold this at an earlier time, say something like 8 o'clock in the morning, would it be a helpful way for you to start your morning in a time of devotion? Please do just post in the comments in YouTube or Facebook just to let us know whether you feel that another time may better suit this reflection. Of course, many of you will be watching this after the event, but we'd love it if as many people could be joining in at the live event so that we can pray together and we can spend this time of devotion in God's Word. Well, as I said previously, we're going to be looking at Psalm 7 this week. So let's just start as I just read several of the verses from the Psalm. So Psalm 7 verse 1 says, I come to you for protection, O Lord. My God, save me from my persecutors. Rescue me. And then in verse 6 it says, Arise, O Lord, in anger. Stand up against the fury of my enemies. Wake up, my God, and bring justice. Gather the nations before you. Rule over them from on high. The Lord judges the nations. Declare me righteous, O Lord. For I am innocent, O Most High. End the evil of those who are wicked and defend the righteous. For you look deep within the mind and heart, O righteous God. God is my shield, saving those whose hearts are pure and right. God is an honest judge. He is angry with the wicked every day. If a person does not repent, God will sharpen his sword. He will bend his string and bow. He will prepare his deadly weapons and shoot his flaming arrows. The wicked conceive evil. They are pregnant with trouble and give birth to lies. They dig a deep pit to trap others, then fall into it themselves. The trouble they make for others backfires on them. The violence they plan falls on their own heads. I will thank the Lord because he is just. I will sing praise to the name of the Lord Most High. When I was reading this psalm, there were two things which struck me immediately on the surface. The first one is the self-righteous nature of the psalmist, or the perception of the psalmist's self-righteousness. And then secondly, the talk of God's justice. The talk of what many people might see as an uncomfortable vision of God. A God of justice who brings down his fury on his enemies, who brings down his anger on his enemies, as it says in verse 6. In many respects, this psalm isn't an easy psalm for us to be looking at this morning, but we need to be careful that we don't just gloss over psalms like this because we may feel a little bit uncomfortable. Because psalms like this still speak a deep truth into our lives. And as we reflect deeper on these two surface questions of self-righteousness and God's justice, which certainly came to my mind, then I think we can actually get a glimpse of our God, who perhaps isn't the God that so many people who wiggle with uncomfortableness when hearing a psalm like this think that God is. You see, firstly, here we have a psalm of petition to God, where the psalmist is going through some sort of an event where they're feeling falsely accused. They are feeling some form of injustice is happening against them. It isn't actually clear exactly what the situation is that the psalmist is speaking into, but certainly they feel like the party that is being wronged. And so they plead to God in their own righteousness that they will not continue to suffer these injustices, that God will bring justice on those which are punishing him. For many people, this is such an uncomfortable image because it portrays a typical issue that Christians often have of being described as being self-righteous, as being hypocritical, as seen as thinking that they're better than other people. And maybe if we were to read this psalm too quickly, we may think this ourselves. But actually, if we take a time to really study the Psalms, then the psalmist is actually asking God not to measure him based on what he thinks his righteousness is, but he's asking God to measure him via God's righteousness. He's asking God to measure his righteousness to what God thinks is right and holy and true. And in the same way, when the psalmist asks God to pull down the justice on those that he believes that are doing him wrong, he's recognizing the justice of God. And that word is so loaded with meaning. And quite often when we hear that word, we paint it as a negative connotation. But then we have to think, what is God's justice about? And if God's justice is based on what we'll be finding out later as we turn to another passage, then maybe from that justice we can get a sense of what is the level of righteousness that this psalmist is being asked to be judged by, to be measured against. So what is God's justice about? Well, let's have a look at Isaiah 58, which talks about God's justice, the kind of justice that the psalmist would have known about when he was talking to God. In Isaiah 58, it says in verse 6, "Free those who are wrongly imprisoned, lighten the burden of those who work for you. Let the oppressed go free and remove the chains that bind people. Share your food with the hungry and give shelter to the homeless. Give clothes to those who need them and do not hide from relatives who need your help. Then your salvation will come like the dawn and your wounds will quickly heal. Your godliness will lead you forward and the glory of the Lord will protect you from behind. Then when you call, the Lord will answer. Yes, I am here, he will reply quickly. Remove the heavy yoke of oppression. Stop pointing your finger and spreading vicious rumors. Feed the hungry and help those in trouble. Then your light will shine out from the darkness, and the darkness around you will be as bright as noon. The Lord will guide you continually, giving you water when you are dry and restoring your strength. You will be like a well-watered garden, like an ever-flowing spring. Some of you will rebuild the deserted ruins of your cities. Then you will be known as a rebuilder of walls and a restorer of homes." You see, maybe if we begin to consider that the justice of God is a justice based on lifting up people out of oppression, of bringing the truly wicked down, then we will realize that Psalm 7 is maybe not a psalm that we need to be uncomfortable with. It's a psalm that we should be proud of. It's a psalm which should challenge us deeply, because it is saying that when we come to God and ask him to measure us by our own righteousness, that this is being measured based on God's justice, the kind of justice that lifts up those who are in need, those who are downtrodden. And actually, as I was just reading Isaiah 58 there, something which struck me just whilst I was reading it, which I hadn't actually noticed before, is when it said in verse 12 that after all of these things, after we begin to demonstrate some of God's justice in the world, then it says, some of you will rebuild the deserted ruins of your cities. Then you will be known as a rebuilder of walls and a restorer of homes. Now, this morning, we are talking in a situation where so many people are going to be feeling the sting of the impact of the coronavirus, whether it is that they've had loved ones which have been affected by it, but also whether they've been affected financially about it. This virus is indiscriminate. It does not choose who it's going to affect. It will affect anybody, irrelevant of their status in life, irrelevant of their level of righteousness. It is literally going to create a situation where homes will be destroyed and will have to be rebuilt again. And yet, amazingly, here in Isaiah, a passage which was prompted by Psalm 7 this morning, it talks about the kind of justice on which homes can be rebuilt in. The kind of justice that when homes are rebuilt in that, then people will know of God's justice, of God's love. And maybe there's a real challenge this morning that as we start coming into a situation where, yes, we're going to be affected by the coronavirus for a long time, but we're beginning to plan for the future. As Christians, as Christ Church, we need to start thinking deeply, praying to God and asking for wisdom of how can we be part of helping to restore people into their new normality. How can we help them begin to get a glimpse of the justice that the psalmist talks about in Psalm 7? A justice which picks up the downtrodden. So as we come to have a time of prayer this morning, maybe we want to focus particularly on the future. To be praying for our guidance from God so that we can follow his will in what would be the best way forward to help people during this time, during a time that so many people are going to be so deeply affected by this virus. There will be lots of people who will be feeling that this was unfair, that they didn't deserve this, and they are right, like the psalmist here. And yet, even in them situations when everything seems like the world is up against you, that everything seems unfair, well, the reality is that God is for you. And as God's people, it is our responsibility to be a light for him in the nations, to demonstrate some of that justice that is being talked about in the Psalms and really exemplified in Isaiah 58. So we're going to have a time of prayer together. What will happen is the screen will now on the live feed will come up with the different prayer points which we're going to be praying. They're very straightforward prayer points which allow us to pray in a structured way, hopefully for the broad effects of the coronavirus across the world, nationally, locally, and for things which are affecting us as a community as well. Please do join in with us on Zoom. The details will be on the Facebook and YouTube chats. Or feel free to also pray along with us and follow the structure of the slides which will be coming up on YouTube. We will do our best to feeding some of the items which are being prayed for at the moment. Please do also remember to feedback if you would like this session to be done at another time, perhaps earlier in the morning, so that it could be something which we could start off with as a devotion, and those that are beginning to go back to work again will be able to have an opportunity to join in with this as well. Or maybe 11 o'clock is as an appropriate time to do this as any. So we're going to have a time of prayer, and at the end of this time of prayer, then I'm just going to come back on and just close our time of prayer together.